Treasury people.
Welcome back to Indianomics. We've been speaking with two eminent men who have been connected with banking, Mr. M. Damodaran, a former chairman of Sebi and of IDBI, and of course a person who has done a lot of work in improving Indian banks, and Mr. A.K. Purwar, former chairman of State Bank of India. We are discussing whether the separation of the CMD post into MD and chairman and the selection of eminent men as chairman is a good first step. Mr. Damodaran, the more important selection, as we have been talking, would be of the MDs. At the moment, in the second round of advertisements, the eligibility criteria has been expanded to 45 to 57 years, 15 years experience in the banking industry itself, and 1 year board level experience. Do you think that this start to make the selection itself competitive and not just a normal ED being promoted as MD is a good start? Will we get at least competitive, competent people with this process?
Let me respond to your first question, which you asked some time ago, which is, would generalist IAS officers make good chairmen?
Yes.
Let's remember that one of the much lauded governors, and lauded for good reasons, governors of the RBI in recent times was a former IAS officer called Dr. Y.V. Reddy. Therefore, let us not, because of some prejudice, believe that persons who come from a certain background are necessarily underqualified for any important job.
Fair enough.
That said, to get to your question on the selection process for managing directors, let's try and understand what the problem is with the public sector banks. The first problem is they suffer from a lack of a level playing field. Because they suffer from a lack of a level playing field, and because of the additional restrictions imposed on the leadership, they're not able to manifest whatever leadership qualities reside in them to an adequate extent. I do not believe that given the size of public sector banks, you cannot find enough leaders to manage these banks, and that you have to look outside to the private sector. It is not as if the private sector is the repository of all efficiency, because efficiency is ownership neutral, and you have seen a number of private sector banks and other private sector institutions come to grief. Is governance very high in private sector banks?
No.
I can give you any number of examples. It will keep us here till tomorrow, including people that walked out on their boards because they were unhappy with the recommendations of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. So let's not go there. What we need to invest time and money in, and we've not done that, is to have a proper selection process which identifies good potential in public sector banks and brings them up to leadership positions sooner rather than later. If you look at the way people have been selected over the last few years, with interviews for executive directors on occasion taking 2 or 3 minutes, with half the selection committee absent when some people were interviewed, reportedly with lists prepared in advance of the meetings. Now, that's not the way to select leaders, and then you believe that the public sector cannot throw up leaders. I don't buy into that. I'm hoping that this selection will throw up some good names, but I do not imagine a private sector banker who is seeing a career progression in his or her bank will willingly migrate to a public sector bank. So are we looking at less than the best moving from the private sector to the public sector? These are the things that worry me.
Yeah, that would be disaster indeed if less than the best went to the public sector. Mr. Damodaran, I completely take your point that the government as shareholder and as, in a sense, regulator should change its DNA in terms of approaching commercial banks. But to come to you, Mr. Purwar, while those seminal changes have to happen at some point in time, is this at least going to be a better tomorrow for the public sector banks after this process of MDs is over?
See, I would put it this way, any change is always attempted for the better, and I'm sure, and it has to evolve. So I would put it this way, that let us give time to this to happen. But I would fully support what Mr. Damodaran said. Public sector has its own rich quality, very good quality people. And some of the institutions in public sector, including my former bank, we have hugely talented people who can manage all kinds of banks. So, and they can stand into comparison with the best of the private sector. So I don't buy this. I would put it this way, that we have to have a very strong selection process to ensure that top quality people get selected for these jobs.
Okay.
And there has to be a very strong, robust process, selection process to make this happen. There has to be, we are playing with public money, we're running into hundreds of lakhs of crores of rupees.
Okay.
And therefore, people who are going to manage these have to be of topmost quality.
Okay.
There should be no compromise there.
No, I have two very important takeaways from what you experts are telling me. One, that the selection process has to be robust, and two, that you believe the public sector has a lot of talent. And considering the people I'm speaking to, I clearly buy into that argument. I was just making the point that some critics have made. But Mr. Damodaran, now for the last question. We are in, the system has evolved over 70 years and it is not going to change very dramatically overnight. But if you have to give one piece of advice or some piece of advice to improve the system, what would that be?
I would say select better leaders, identify better leaders, select better leaders, mentor them, and these eminent people that you mentioned at the beginning of the program can come in there, create a level playing field for public sector banks, empower the leadership, and let the leadership see itself as empowered, because it's not enough to empower. The perception of empowerment is also important. And let young people look at this as a career option where if you join at a very young age, you can progress to the top job in the organization. What you're now signaling to the youth who will apply for these jobs tomorrow is no matter how good you are, you will not become the chairman of the bank, because that is somebody who will come from the outside based on a track record outside of banking, or mostly outside of banking. Is that the signal you want to give to young people joining a large public sector industry?
No, take your points.